Okay, so really this is just a level of care overview of the process. There's new pieces here. There's actually a new funding request form that we're going to talk about, and then this is just a refresher for those of you who have been doing levels of care for years. And so if that's the case, just bear with us here. This is the new snippet of the form. So it's actually been updated as of August of this month, so just a couple days ago here, or yesterday. It's been really condensed. So we took a lot of those sections out that we didn't need in there necessarily now, given the fact that case management organizations are submitting the funding requests. But just some key points on what is contained in this form, which the form is out on the website and able to be accessed now in its updated format. So go ahead and take a look at that out there. And then it has the date 8/16 in the bottom left-hand corner, I believe, so you'll make sure that you're using the updated version. But we will still process any that were turned in, up until now on that older version. But you're wanting to make sure that you're noting the expected start date of the participant services, their SSI status, and I put a little asterisk there because we're going to talk shortly about why that is so important. And then the current funding source is now a drop-down box, and it includes the ICF, both SDDC and children's care, and out-of-state, family home, family support, a few other options. So just make sure we're using the drop-down. And we're wanting to identify the types of services a person may need, and then this form, when complete, is sent to the assigned program specialist for processing. Those are really the only updates to the form. Just like I said, took out the pieces that were no longer applicable given the process now. SSI status is important to have identified on that form so that if a person is not receiving SSI, the level of care information likely needs to be sent to the Disability Determination Team, also known as DICT, for approval, and that can take a couple of weeks. And as it's always been this way, however, it's sometimes forgotten that the last date of any of the signed required documents is the date that can be utilized as a HCBS start date for a person. So if the DICT date of approval exceeds that date, that would be the new date for waiver services to be able to be funded. I have an example here. So if a person starts services on the 2nd of July, the level of care is submitted the 15th of July, then has to go through DICT. We get that acceptance from them that yes, the person is disabled by the standards that are required. Then the earliest HCBS funding date would be that DICT date of 8/24. And we'll talk more about the dates here in a little bit as well when we talk about the different documents that are required for the level of care. Here we go. We have the current psychological or qualifying psychoeducational evaluation. It needs to show a diagnosis, disability prior to age 22, IQ score, other related condition, and adaptive behavior. After this webinar here wraps up, we will have Dr. Jay Trenhale, which I'm sure most of you had seen in person as he's presenting information about eligibility at the CFCM trainings that took place in Pierre in May and June. But we're having his presentation be recorded as well for a training tool, and that will take place at 2 o'clock today, 2 o'clock Central. The ICAP eligibility form needs to be filled out, and all of the forms that are listed here should be available on the website, including the CTS ones, which I just had Dan Hoblik, our communications director, add yesterday. So some of those had not been up there until yesterday, and if we find there's other forms that would be helpful to have on the website, just let one of us know. Colin or I typically visit with Dan the most, so we can get those updated and put on the website if you so desire. ICAP booklet, all sections marked and legible, and it probably goes without saying, but the legibility is a huge piece. I would say that out of There's probably not a month that goes by where just the levels of care that I personally process where the document is not fully legible. People are using the booklets again and again, so they're using pencil while they're filling those out, which is fine, and we understand that, but we need to make sure that the markings are dark enough that when it's copied, and sometimes copied multiple times, that it is able to be read. And also, not only is it dark enough, but sometimes if there's a change from a 1 to a 3, that 1 still shows up a little bit when it's copied out, scanned or copied, and that is an issue because if Jenny, the senior secretary who enters the ICAPS, if she can't read for certainty which question or which answer is for that question, she will send it back, and then we have to send it back to you all, do the legwork, and get the proper response. So if you want to just take a look at it when you scan and copy it and make sure it's legible, that would be very helpful. And then the ICAP CompuScore sheet, that 3-page document that needs to be submitted. The significant change request as the provisional plan of care, that needs to be submitted with a level of care. Your funding request is already submitted. I should have noted that up here too, but your funding request comes in already. Then these documents, your waiver rights form, the 717, and then the 716 that you fill out that top section of, or about 2/3 of the document. That needs to be filled out and signed and dated. We continue to receive those coming in that aren't signed and dated. So just like any document, make sure they're all fully complete. And then here is a snippet of yesterday, how it looked on the website. And like I said, we updated a couple additional forms. So that's what is out there now. Right here, it says all documents must be dated prior to or on the start date of waiver services. This is important, like I said, in the example with the DICT piece, that is very important because let's say we get the 717 form and then the person didn't sign it in advance of them starting. Maybe they're moving across state and they sign it a day or two after starting. That's an issue because then we would have to go with that date they actually signed the form and then be able to process it given that date. So just to make sure that all documents are dated prior to or on the start date of waiver services. And then I should also mention that there is a copy of this presentation able to be downloaded. If you click towards the bottom of the screen, you would be able to download the PowerPoint for this. And like I said, we'll also post it to the website in both the webinar format that we're recording here and then also the PDF format of the slides themselves. Okay, so documents for the level of care must have dates prior to or on the proposed effective date of service for a participant. I've hit on this multiple times throughout this presentation, but it is a very crucial step. An example, that 717 that I said right here, here's some tangible dates to look at. They started on 7/4, form wasn't completed until 7/11. The 7/4 to 7/10 won't be able to be paid out. Also, levels of care cannot be approved until after a participant is receiving a waiver service. So if you have a questionable psychological that you're just not sure if a person qualifies or not, your assigned program specialist can review the documentation ahead of time and maybe provide some impressions based on their experience, but they cannot, give a final approval or disapproval until it actually goes through the review process and is afforded that due process by the waiver manager. And if it's a denial, then also goes to DSS for processing. But after you receive a green light from the waiver manager on the level of care, so it goes to the program specialist, we send it to the waiver manager, and if all is good, no further questions, eligibility is there, all the documents are there, they're legible, then the packet goes to the Department of Social Services, to the assigned benefits specialist, and they will issue the approval form out to you all. There was one component of the webinar that I just realized I did not include in here. So when you're making your application to DSS for Medicaid, I think it's a 265, I'm just writing a note down here to include that information. When that form is submitted to DSS, it starts a 45-day window of time And so this level of care process can sometimes exceed that, especially if we have to go through the eligibility review team, like we'll talk about here, or even that DICT team. Sometimes that affects the timeliness of processing, or if there's forms needing to be updated or they're not legible. But it really, when you submit the 265, is likely when you should also submit the majority of your level of care documents, not necessarily when you send in your funding request. It all depends on how, your timelines are. If you're submitting your funding request 2 months in advance of a person's start date, then you would not want to send your DSS application at that time because you'll exceed those 45 days. DSS is able to do extensions if it's like an ERT review or a DICT team review, or if maybe an adaptive behavior testing is needed as it wasn't initially included in the psychological. But they can only, I believe, extend that 2 or 3 times. And really, if a person, it exceeds the time frame and they're not able to extend it, then they would just need to reapply. But that is, quite a bit of additional paperwork needing to be resent in. So we just try to follow that 45-day time frame. Here's the ERT information, which is the eligibility review team. And really, this is if the program specialist is not able to make a determination of eligibility, we can request an ERT review. ERT meets, they might ask for additional information such as the adaptive testing, or maybe there's just no concrete diagnosis in a psychological. Maybe the document's fairly old and they want an updated version. It depends on what they're going to ask for. But the ERT meetings, they are not like on a recurring basis. They're just called when levels of care come in that warrant an ERT review. And so it can take a couple of weeks or longer depending on if information is needed and then how quick the necessary parties can get together to meet. So the ERT date will not affect the date of funding for services like the DICT date does. However, obviously, if a person is determined to not be eligible, funding would not be able to be provided. So likely a participant would want to hold off on, or I should say an organization would want to hold off on a participant starting services if there's any, real question of eligibility. I wanted to include CTS information in here. CTS, Community Training Services, it's general funds, so just state funds, does not draw down that federal match like HCBS does. And so we have the same eligibility requirements, but since it's state funds, there's a little bit more flexibility. And so sometimes you'll find that if a person is, not necessarily meeting the HCBS requirements any longer, sometimes CTS might be used for a very short period of time to help them phase out of services if maybe they've, met their goals and are no longer eligible through their ICAP or something, for example. But likely and typically it's the same eligibility requirement. So if a person is applying for CTS, there is no funding request required, but you do, however, have supporting documentation needed. So you have your 700 form, and it's the financial eligibility form. You'll see a snippet of that on the next form, or the next slide, but you'll want to make sure to check the fiscal year on that document. Then you'll have the significant change request, which again functions as the provisional plan of care. Psychological, same criteria as HCBS applicants would face. Then you have your ICAP, signed, dated, and once again, make sure it's legible, your ICAP booklet, and your ICAP CompuScore. So all those documents would be submitted to your assigned program specialist anytime a person is wanting to enter CTS. And there is no formal rate generated for the person. Like if a person were to apply for HCBS, you'll get a letter, or you'll get some documentation, I should say, saying what the rate for the person is, and that does not happen with CTS, as that is billed by the organization to the state based on 15-minute increments of services being provided. There's also no approval letter sent from DSS or from the division, like you would have with HCBS applicants. The letter comes from DSS. Here's a snippet of that form. So you'll see FY17 is in the top right corner. And there's also another page on the back for emergency application. But this form is important because a component of CTS is also the financial eligibility, and there is a bit of a table here that you'll need to look at for the person to make sure they're also financially eligible for services. So if a person's moving from HCBS to CTS, a discharge must occur to end HCBS services. And even if a person has been on HCBS and might be moving to CTS for whatever reason, you'll still need to send the information in that were listed on the last slide here to make sure that they are eligible for services and just so we have clean records. All right, that is all of really the information that I had prepared in a PowerPoint to share. And so like I said, this has been recorded so that we can post it to the website. So I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we can open it up for any questions.